People will have noticed that Mick Lynch has come into the studio, General Secretary of the RMT Union. What did you make of the exchanges that you heard there between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak on the issue of resolving these strikes?
Well, I'm sure some politicians find it entertaining, but there's lots of people out there that are struggling who want some solutions. There are nurses and rail workers. There will be teachers coming into this. There's public sector workers right across the country that cannot cope with the wages that they're being paid. They are being underpaid for their labour. And the government has got to come up with a solution to that. The government is actively torpedoing the talks on the railway dispute. I've been in the room when the executives of the railway tell me the government will not allow a solution that we, the executives, could put to you to develop up into a programme.
So what is the solution, Mick?
The solution is that we need compromise, as has been said.
But what does that look like?
Well, it means that we get a modification of the programmes that they want to put forward in terms of stripping out our members' terms and conditions, that we get a security guarantee on jobs, and we get an improvement in the pay offer. The pay offer is ridiculously low. Our members have not had a pay rise for 2 or 3 years. And the offer that's been put, that somebody said was high over there, is 4% in each of 2 years that covers a period where inflation has been 22%. And beyond that, we didn't have a pay rise for 2 years before.
All right, ridiculously low. So what would be acceptable? Well,
I'll deal with that with the employer. I'm not going to deal with you.
Well, now, hang on a second, because no one wants to... Everyone says it's about pay and it's about money.
You can't negotiate with me, Jo, can you?
No, I can't. But it would be good to get... It would be a good... Well, except you've been round the table and you can't seem to, or rather, union members have been round the table and they still haven't.
I've been allowed to negotiate. These executives have said to me, I am not allowed by a government minister, the Secretary of State for Transport, who's been overseen by Jeremy Hunt and Rishi Sunak. Yeah. I am not allowed to put a document on this table that I have drawn up and would take us forward to resolving this.
Well, I am going to allow you. I'm going to give you the freedom and liberate you from those constraints so that we can hear at least where your thinking is on this. And I'm going to do the same with both the Conservatives and Labour here so that people can understand what is in the minds of the important players in this negotiation. Because, as we've heard, we've got a wave of industrial action. We have got nurses going on strike for the first time in their history. So would a pay rise at inflation, let's take today's latest figures, 10.5%, just over, would that be in the ballpark?
Well, our union's policy is for a substantial increase in salaries. We don't tie it to a particular level of inflation. RPI is the reference point, and RPI is taken off like a balloon that's gone loose. Nobody can catch it. And this myth that the Tories are putting round that workers' wages have created inflation is an utter fallacy.
Well, they're saying pay rises would.
Well, we haven't had any pay rises. How can our members' inflation of wages contributed to inflation when they haven't had any at all?
Do his members deserve, Mick Lynch's members, deserve a pay rise substantially more than 4%? Let's take the 10.7%, today's inflation figure.
Well, I haven't been involved, obviously, in the transport negotiations, but what we've said to nurses is that that's why we've got an independent pay review body. It's interesting that Liz says that Labour would negotiate, but they're not doing that in Wales with their members. And the midwives in Wales voted to go on strike yesterday, but the midwives in England didn't. So, you know, I think there's a range of issues there. I think, Mick, you know, it would be helpful to know, because my understanding is that when you have been in discussions, it's not necessarily about the pay, it's about the conditions that you're not happy with. And I think to say it's just about pay, I think it's slightly misleading.
About pay. Your ministers have given a mandate to the companies that say you must cut conditions, you must increase unsocial hours, you must change roster patterns, and you must cut the safety regime on the railway by 50%. That's what the mandate your government has given to Network Rail and to the train operators. Last Sunday, or the Sunday before last, the Secretary of State instructed the train operating companies to demand driver-only operation, a thing that they know we can never, ever accept. So your government has directly torpedoed those talks and sunken the process.
Maria?
Your government is responsible directly for these strikes this Christmas.
I don't agree with that. I mean, if you meet with people who are travelling on the trains trying to get to work, who also often have their rosters changed, who often has to do unsocial hours, they're being put in a position this Christmas that they can't get to see their families, they can't get to work. Why can't you accept that?
Because it's been our policy for 40 years. Everybody in the industry knows that will never be acceptable acceptable to our union.
Never.
The executives that you charge with that.
But Mick, you talked about, hang on, Mick, you talked about, when you answered my first question, you talked about compromise, saying we will never do X, Y and Z, we will never accept that. Where's the compromise?
Got a 35-page document full of changes on the railway, and DOO wasn't in it. It was acceptable to the train operating driver-only operation.
Yeah.
It was acceptable to the railway executives, the most senior people in the industry. They went to Whitehall. Whitehall sent them back on a mission that they could never complete because it undermined the talks.
Right, and in terms of the pay review body, I mean, let's just talk about this because people will think the pay review body, you know, what do they do? Why can't you go beyond what this body that is tasked with coming up with public sector increases in pay or not? You can go beyond what they offer. You can go higher than the 3% that they suggested. It isn't written in law that you can't, and governments do. The SNP have just agreed slightly higher wage increases than the pay review body, as Stephen Flynn said there, with various unions. Why can't you?
So we could, but what I'm saying is that will cost money to do that.
Right.
We either have to borrow that money, and we've seen in recent weeks what that does to the economy when the government borrows substantial amounts of money. Because we're talking about £10 billion just to deliver the RCN 19% increase, or we take it from services, and they are political choices. We absolutely need to get on top of those backlogs.
Borrow money to feed nurses.
But we've got to get on top of. We're opening up new surgical hubs. We're opening new diagnostic centres. We've got very sick people on waiting lists. And they're our priority.
Would you borrow the money? Would Labour borrow the money to pay more to nurses and railway staff, or would they tax more?
We absolutely want to see our nurses getting a fair pay rise.
And what does that look like?
More. I can't pluck a number out of
I
nowhere.
asked Mick to put the number between, what, let's say 3 or 4%, or 10%, which is around inflation.
But I think what Maria hasn't recognised is that we have got 50,000 nurse vacancies at the moment, 9,000 doctor vacancies. Last year, the NHS spent £3 billion on agency staff instead of tackling the root cause of the problem, employing and training more doctors and nurses, as we've said we'll do by scrapping the non-dom tax status and retaining them by having better terms and conditions. I've got a food bank at my hospital because the nurses can't afford to pay their bills after everything they have been through. The negotiation needs to happen. Both sides need to give ground. And all I would say is, I understand people want all the details from us now, but our track record in government, there wasn't a national strike in the NHS, there wasn't a national strike
what's Labour doing
on the
in Wales, where you're actually in government
on our track
there?
record, I tell you what, you know, if you look at the Labour government's record on pay rises, fair pay rises for nurses and other staff, record levels of satisfaction with the NHS and the lowest ever waiting times. Nurses over the last 12 years have given their all. The situation is getting worse. And what people want isn't this conversation going round and round and round again. They want the government to get round the table and sort it.
So you're going to do that in Wales?
We will always negotiate. We will always negotiate to get a solution.
Chris?
That's what we've done in the past and is what we'll do in government.